Welcome back, everyone, to the We Were on a Break series podcast. I'm here with my friend, expert witness, the queen of SAR analytics, Alison. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do, where you're from, and let the audience really get to know you.
So I can't top that introduction, so I'm just going to sign off now. Thanks, Stephen. My name is Alison Jimenez. I'm president of Dynamic Securities Analytics. I'm going to just call it DSA because that's a mouthful. So I've been in the securities litigation, anti-money laundering field for a long time now, going on 20 years. I primarily serve as an expert witness in financial crime disputes and money laundering disputes. So what that means is, when pretty much all the other measures fail and it finally gets to a point where there's a regulatory investigation or a lawsuit, then I'm retained by either a financial services company or perhaps someone who lost funds, or perhaps by a regulator. And I come in as an outsider and look to see what happened, where did the funds go, what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and then I will testify in hearings, sometimes arbitration, sometimes like bankruptcy proceedings, wherever these proceedings eventually end up. So that's what I generally do on a day-to-day basis, but I also do things like some AML software consulting, because I'm pretty good at digging around data, and that's one of the things I do for fun, like looking at the suspicious activity reports, data that I think we're going to talk about today.
That's awesome. So you're like the hired gun. I think everyone that watches like these legal shows, they always like have that, the doors flap open at the back of the courtroom and you come in with your briefcase. Everyone's like, oh no, Alison's here. Like you're the hired gun that comes in and kind of, they know that your analytics and your research abilities are just such at the top tier that they can rely on your expert witness and your testimony to validate the information for their case. That's amazing. How did you get into now you say you do the SAR stuff for fun. How did you get into analyzing suspicious activity reports, but you really niched yourself as an expert and a subject matter expert in cryptocurrency? So how did this go from the courtroom to Silicon Valley?
Sure. So I just find data interesting. and one of the best especially in the world of AML, one of the best sources of data are this SAR stats that FinCEN produces on their website. And I can't help myself but dig around, see what's in there. And, partly it's to find out, trends, and if I do some compliance consulting to know what people are discovering or what they should be discovering. It's just a great resource to, investigate and, come up with some ideas of how to do things better, or what could be, what are we missing, what areas need to be looked at a little more closely. So it's a good area. And then tying that with crypto, another area that just has so much data with the blockchain, it's really amazing. And you see a lot of firms out there that do amazing work with that data. So it kind of brings together two of the things I really enjoy, money laundering and digging around data, and then the cryptocurrency issues, which that there's so much data to work with. It's really interesting. Where we were missing some information was in the area of what SARs are being filed, either about the financial product itself, virtual assets, cryptocurrency, whatever you want to call it. That's one of the points of contention that I have with the current methodology. And then also, what is the industry itself? What are exchanges filing? What are other platforms that are doing lending? Are they filing? What are they filing? What are they discovering? Are they ahead of the curve? Are they behind the curve? And I was trying to answer some of those questions that really hadn't been answered previously for various reasons.
That's awesome. And, I think FinCEN provides a wealth of data and information, but there's some ambiguity involved in it. You're looking at 2021, your amazing blog post talks about over 3 million SARs that were filed in 2021. That's like, on an average day, FinCEN's receiving about 10,000 SARs a day. Is FinCEN the only financial intelligence unit that provides this type of reporting about their SARs, or is there other jurisdictions around the world that also does this?
Some do, and it really varies. I once tried to write a blog along that lines of, okay, well, even comparing what the SAR form looks like in Canada versus the US versus Australia, and those even vary. And again, it varies from FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, from country to country of what kind of data they provide. So more often it's on an annual basis. I know the UK provides some data, but FinCEN's fairly unique in that they really break it down into some granular detail, and it's updated again fairly regularly, sometimes every month, sometimes every 2 or 3 months. But it's just a fun piece of data to work with. But there's a lot of caveats to that data of understanding what it means. It's also filed by people and what mistakes filers often do. So I've been working with this data since at least 2009. My oldest blog post was many years ago, but it's a great resource, but there's a lot of caveats that go with the data. And when I was writing this one about cryptocurrency, I go into a lot of the caveats. What can we infer? What can we not infer? Because there's just as much data as there is, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And each individual SAR is protected with secrecy. So I only have the meta level, the nationwide stats, or the countywide stats, or the industry stats. And I can't tell you what an individual firm's doing, or an individual person who was reported that's information is secret for a reason. But the large trends are pretty interesting to look at.
And you make a really great point with one of your first findings, is that you're thinking approximately about 180,000 SARs are filed by cryptocurrency exchanges just in the San Francisco area alone, or have permanent addresses in San Francisco. How did you come to this quickly? How did you come to this number? And then I'll kind of have some follow-up questions about how can you decipher it's crypto exchanges versus maybe other fintechs or non-crypto platforms that we've seen emerge out of Silicon Valley in the last 2 years due to the amount of funding and also due to COVID and the online nature of our financial transactions.
Good points. So every year I do a year look back. So I first noticed this sharp uptick in San Francisco County without knowing who was doing these filings. I just saw that this was a weird outlier county that was filing, multiple times the number of any other county, but I didn't know who or what. And I also personally thought maybe it was some of these fintechs that I just generally know were based in the Silicon Valley area, San Francisco area. And I had previously written a post in 2017 about social media and fintech payments. So I was familiar with back offices of some of those, having written that blog. And to the point of how did I know which entities are in San Francisco, FinCEN also has, again, they have a lot of interesting data on their website. They have a registry of all the money services businesses, and you can search by city or state and find out where the permanent addresses of these entities are. So I saw this outlier county. I tried to figure out, well, why is it an outlier county? Who's filing? And then kind of went from there to see who's registered in San Francisco proper. Many of the fintech payment industries, they are in the Silicon Valley area, but they're actually located in different counties. Santa Clara County, for instance, has homes to a lot of the more payment-related spaces. But San Francisco does have, one or two of these fintech companies. So I had to look at prior years. The fintech's been around a little bit longer, than the crypto, and see, what were they filing in 2017, 2018, 2019, to kind of get a baseline for these non-crypto firms. And kind of comparing that to the other counties where I know these other fintech types are located in San Mateo. I got very familiar with San Francisco or California counties doing this. So I could see who was located where and try to have them a baseline with their fellow fintechs. And I accounted for that and backed out this good number of SARs from San Francisco that were likely filed by non-crypto. But then the other interesting thing is the crypto filers, their suspicious activity they were detecting is different than what fintechs are detecting. They have different customers doing different things. So that was another way to kind of separate out, the crypto from the fintech. And then also, your traditional check cashers, they also have offices in that county, but they have offices in that county, which deals with, customers walking in with cash. So you can see by the actual activity being reported, what is the typical customer, and typical fintech customer is different than someone walking in for cash check caching versus a crypto customer. So it's kind of there's a lot of parsing of the data to figure out what is a typical behavior for a given business enterprise. And that's kind of one of my conclusions is we need better SAR data. We need to break out this huge MSB category, which right now includes, payment firms, the crypto firms, check cashers, the international wire senders, remittances, they're all lumped together. So it's a lot of legwork that if I'm having to do it, FinCEN doesn't have that data either, neither does law enforcement, neither does regulators when they're trying to figure out how to best regulate the industry. So that's something I just wanted to draw attention. I did the best I could with a lot of limitations on the data I was provided, but those same limitations are being faced by regulators and by the enforcement agencies. So I think by improving the SAR form to more closely align with the US has national priorities for money laundering, and virtual currency and virtual currency exchanges are on that national priority list, yet they're not on the SAR. That just seems,
right,
like a good first step. Let's start there.
I think you did. I think I never thought of like the geographical location and adding in elements of the actual behavior or the actions, the suspicious indicators that were being filed upon. So I think that's a really great point, is that crypto firms are going to look a lot different than even traditional institutions, traditional MSBs and fintechs. Now,
so
you did,
for instance, I was going to say last year I looked at how COVID impacted SARs, and you can see along the US border, MSBs along the US border with Mexico, they had a lot more cash report, trying to avoid CTR thresholds, things like that. And that was, it's just interesting. The geographic data, it's interesting. You can find out interesting things like, okay, well, you can't, the Mexico-US border is closed. You can't move cash across the border. You're going to try and wire it, from a fund transfer firm. And now you're having to avoid the CTR threshold. So these things build upon themselves. You get a good feel for what are bad actors doing, and then also what are the financial institutions, what are they seeing and discovering? And then, if you're another financial institution in that same space, are you seeing that yourself? Are you behind the ball? Are you ahead of the ball on these trends?
That's a great typology. And I think that's really interesting about the borders being closed and how the transactions would then change to be more fund transfers. Yeah. You talk about in 2000, sorry, go ahead.
Then it kind of ties with what you said about, COVID affected a lot of things, and not just for bad actors. People are doing more fund transfers and electronic transfers, and this people's they're not walking into banks anymore to open accounts. So it just be interesting to see the SAR data. How does that match up?
Speaking of SAR data, you talk about, 2019 is really when the regulators, FinCEN and other US regulators were really pushing for crypto exchanges to kind of follow suit with traditional MSBs to register. And we saw basically a rise in SARs from that. Can you talk a little bit about that? We also saw at that same time, public-private partnerships like Project Participate, FATF, they were also releasing guidance and suspicious indicators. It's one thing to say you should file SARs. It's another thing to give the industry, well, what should you be looking for to file these SARs? Can you talk about a little bit about the compliance framework maybe that changed from 2019 until today?
Sure. And that's kind of another reason I feel that that 180,000 is reasonable given the timing of when did the regulation come out. Firms are rolling, setting up more robust compliance. They're actually getting registered for the first time. They now have the typologies. It's like you said, you can say, well, file SARs. Well, what does suspicious activity look like at a cryptocurrency exchange? That that could be very different from what it looks like at a different type of institution. And you always have to keep up with the bad guys. They're always evolving. So the public-private partnerships are very important for the both the firms to speak to each other and with the regulators of what's a new methodology, what should we look for, and I think with that government push to get regulation, you can see that following through with increased SAR filings in the industry. And then one of the really interesting things was the second most frequently filed suspicious activity category was for these registered exchanges were filing SARs about unregistered MSBs, which I strongly believe they were filing about unregistered crypto exchanges or crypto platforms, whether it's one guy in his basement doing things individually, or it's an organized group or business that should be registered, or it's an ATM machine, Bitcoin ATM that should be registered and it isn't. So that was interesting to me that they really were able to identify those actors and file SARs. And that's, again, something that FinCEN and even DOJ has really been focused on, is getting the industry within the regime and making sure they have the policy procedures and they're filing SARs and doing transaction monitoring and KYC and all those things. And if folks want to remain outside of the regulatory regime, then they're going to get a lot more attention. And it seems like they should be aware that their registered counterparts are letting law enforcement know that they're out there outside of the regime.
Yeah, you definitely want to tell on your competitor down the street.
Yeah,
if you're a Bitcoin
they're saving a lot of money.
spending a ton of money on on having a compliance program, and the bodega down the street has an ATM where people are walking in and out with it definitely. But you also mentioned a couple other leading categories when it came to the type of transactions. One of the bigger ones was transactions that apparently had no economic benefit or lawful business purpose. Can you talk about a little bit about that from your perspective?
Sure. That was the leading category filed by MSPs in San Francisco, again, with the assumption that most of them were filed by crypto exchanges. That category, no business purpose, is actually very common across all industries. It's usually in the top 5 at different, depending if you're a bank or a securities firm. It's kind of the catch-all. We can't explain why they did this, but it was even more so prominent in that county. It just was almost accounted for like 97% of SARs had that checkbox. That leads me, again, I only have limited data, and it leads me to believe maybe it could be due to the firms identifying layering transactions or potential wash trades. But as someone who's outside of these firms, it'd be a lot for feedback from folks who are within the firms of what they think, or what are the transactions that they see are suspicious, can't explain for sure. But those are potential examples of what I think could be layering, or perhaps wash trading, where they're trying to pump up either the price or the volume of trading in a some small token that's not heavily traded, and they're trying to do transactions with themselves or with their co-conspirators to increase price or volume, and then walk away with a bunch of funds. That's what I believe could be happening, but with the limited information, we still need more research in that too.
Yeah, it's tough on those ones because, definitely there's probably going to be layering activity, especially because crypto exchanges essentially act as mixers themselves. If you're sending Bitcoin into a crypto exchange, the flow of funds stops when you go to remove it because they're really pooling the withdrawals. So a deposit and a withdrawal can never be connected by somebody just simply looking at the blockchain. So an exchange is a real great place if you have maybe a illicit Bitcoin to send to it, and then you have clean funds coming out from a low risk exchange on the other side. I'm not going to be naive enough to think that a lot of it might be tied to defensive filing. As you said, this is kind of the catch-all statement that you don't really know what's going on, but if you had to file a SAR, a lot of organizations feel it's better to file a SAR than not to file one, and they kind of use this as their catch-all. We see that in traditional as well as crypto exchanges as well. One of the other ones that was a little bit interesting was the suspicious use of multiple accounts. What did you find from this specific indicator?
Sure. So you're allowed to select as many categories as you want. And just mathematically speaking, that, they almost always filed transaction with no business purpose. And they also often filed, multiple accounts. So if you have a transaction that's moving between multiple accounts, you have multiple accounts, again, it could be for that, they're trying to break the tracing capabilities, or they're trying to, again, do some sort of manipulation scheme, or they're, an organized group where they're trying to move funds between different participants. So again, coming from the securities background, it's interesting that so many of the schemes in crypto are very similar to what I've seen doing securities for as long as I have. I started off as a securities regulator, so I'm like, wow, this seems like this is brand new. And then when I start digging into it, I'm like, oh, I've seen this before. Whether it's a pump and dump for a penny stock or pump and dump for a token, the behavior is very similar. You're gonna have multiple accounts. You're gonna pretend everyone doesn't know each other, and you're all working together to manipulate this token or security.
It's a financial product at the end of the day, just like credit cards and, as you said, penny stocks. It's one of those things that the typologies don't really vary that much. It's just what they're the medium of exchange that they use that does vary.
This is. I think for folks who are just getting into crypto, it could seem so foreign. But if you've been in AML, or you've been in securities, or you've been in in a bank working with prepaid cards, the schemes are there's only so many ways you can steal money. You just use a different product to do it. So they've applied traditional schemes, within the crypto industry. And I know they have some new ones they've come up with, but that's part of the, why the public-private partnerships are so valuable, to be able to exchange information of what's new that we haven't seen before. So I think that's great that there's the organizations are doing that amongst themselves to stay, maybe not a step ahead, but at least only one or two steps behind the criminals.
Right. And I think what's interesting about the suspicious use of multiple accounts, because it's non-face-to-face onboarding, it's really easy to open up accounts. You'll see this a lot more than with traditional financial institutions, where you have to go in there, fill out a whole bunch of forms. When you can onboard in 5 to 10 minutes, you're more likely to open up multiple accounts. Similar to what you were saying about almost like the structuring at the border, where large amounts of crypto might come in to these exchanges in smaller amounts to avoid reporting requirements, or to even avoid scrutiny, right? You might not scrutinize $8,000 transactions, but you might scrutinize one large transaction for 100,000 or 200,000, which many illicit actors may try to avoid.
That's a great point.
Yeah. One thing I really find interesting is you even kind of highlighted, after you went through this analysis, you said, you know what, there's also some SARs that weren't being filed in large numbers. Let's make sure the crypto community knows about these. You talk a lot in this about wash trading, and I put corruption together. What did you see, or what didn't you see when it came to wash trading and corruption? So,
I don't want to go over wash trading too much. There is in the US a specific category for wash trading, and that's the definition of trying to manipulate the price or trade volume of something. And that was not selected, and I just surprised, because that's something that's generally known that occurs in cryptocurrency. So maybe they don't have the algorithms down pat yet, or maybe they're lumping it into a different category. Now, corruption is just an area that I'm personally interested in, and there's a lot of features that cryptocurrency has that is attractive to a corrupt actor. And there weren't that many filings in that area. And I just think between the US, the White House has a new anti-corruption push. So, I don't know yet how often cryptocurrency is used in corruption, but I do know the White House is really concerned about corruption, and they're really concerned about this industry. So if I want to be proactive in this industry, I would make sure I'm really looking hard. I'm checking the PEP list. I'm seeing if they're using front people, to open the strawman, to open the accounts, things like that, because having pressure from two different regulators on an issue and not paying attention to it's probably not going to work out well for you.
You raise a good point about being proactive. I feel like when you'll see a lot of SARs in these cases, they'll be very reactive. Like you see something in the news, or something pops up on World Check or one of those other sanctions screening, and then you file the SAR. I think wash trading, even with the blockchain analytic tools that we have today, is very hard to detect. I feel unless you're fall under certain security requirements in cryptocurrency exchange, it's still in that gray area.
I agree. I bet some firms are thinking it's, no one's told us it's a security yet. So is it really wash trading? But is it, that's more of a legal argument to me. If you're trying to, create a false impression, I think that's one for the lawyers still to decide. But that's something. You could be reactive or proactive. Just pointing out, no one's filing it. No, very few are being filed so far.
And I think there's kind of that general rumor in the industry about crypto exchanges actually wash trading between their own accounts in order to create a larger volume of transactions to attract people to the crypto exchange. We saw in Canada with an organization, CoinSquare, that were penalized from this because they were regulated under, I believe, the Ontario Securities Commission, where they actually had a bot doing transactions, and people were able to figure it out. Just at the time of the transactions were all nighttime compared to when people would be sleeping, and the volume of transactions, and actually internal people, there were whistleblowers that said, yeah, there is a bot that's actually doing the wash trading. So I think it's one of those gray areas. There's also rumors that people or organizations are doing it purposely to gain a competitive advantage. With the corruption, I think as well too, although there's PEP lists and, you know, high risk lists for wealthy individuals, I think it's still going to be more of a reactive one. One thing
even in other financial institutions, it's not really a very highly reported area. I mean, it's certainly one that when corruption schemes, you know, happen, that they get a lot of attention, but it's, you know, there's not a lot of SAR filings in any industry. I just want to point out this industry might want to, you know, make sure they're doing everything they can because they have a lot of eyes looking at them.
Yeah, and those eyes are always looking for the biggest hole to come in to come in and regulate. I think you talked about schemes, but you mentioned Ponzi schemes as one of those ones that you felt maybe SARS should be filed more on. Talk about your discovery.
Sure. In my first interaction with crypto was actually through Ponzi schemes. As I said, doing the securities expert witness work, I've worked on Ponzi schemes for a long time, and I find them personally endlessly interesting. But you know, several cases are the fraudulent ICOs, but there's also you know, different Ponzi schemes within the industry, where I think having the SARs that have a filing for cryptocurrency in general, whether it's at a bank or a securities firm, it would help capture some more of those Ponzi schemes, whether it's a token or whether it's a, hey, we're going to build this new mining tool and invest with us, and you'll get a percentage of the, you know, whatever we mine, and that happens, and you'll see a bunch of, and that's a Ponzi scheme that could potentially happen within an exchange. Send your Ether to us here, and then we're going to mine, and then we'll send it back to you. And you know, that is the type of transactions with the right algorithm or with the right questions could actually be uncovered. And you know, the DOJ seems to love to prosecute Ponzi schemes, especially involving cryptocurrency. So again, you know, it's a bit reactive, but you know, Ponzi schemes happen in all types of industries, through all types of financial institutions, and I think that's an area that they could put a little more attention to.
I think one thing I noticed is that, you know, right now there's a lot of money flowing into cryptocurrency. You usually don't see the aftermath of Ponzi schemes until the money kind of runs dry and people stop getting their money back. So Ponzi schemes obviously fueled with new money, ton of new money in the system.
Right.
You probably won't see the after effect of these SARs for a couple of years to come, if we go through a winter, or with some of that new money dries up and people aren't getting their returns. People usually don't cry until they actually lose their money.
You're right. That's an excellent point. But that's where, you know, the power of some of the transaction monitoring can nip these things early in the bud. So you're right. The complaints happen when the income payment stops, or whatever you know, promise you're supposed to receive. But the transaction monitoring, that's where I come in as an expert. I'm like, well, didn't you notice that they received all these small dollar amounts from investors, and they said they were an XYZ firm, but they didn't actually produce any XYZ, and then they spent the money on a yellow Lamborghini? Those are red flags that should be noticed. You know, you don't have to wait for a customer to complain that they didn't receive their interest payment. There are
we saw that with ICOs. We're probably going to see it a little bit with the NFTs. And your last one is cyber events. I guess, you know, ransomware, hacks, I can lump them all. You said these were far and few in between. Talk about what you saw.
Yeah, I was surprised that there were not more SAR filings. But in the US, our SARs, they kind of have 3 different filing types for cyber events: against the firm, against the customer, and other. There was very few filings in any of those categories, especially when you compare it against, to say, securities firms. I believe there was, you know, maybe 67 or 70 entire within the crypto exchange file for the entire year. And then comparing that against securities firms, which filed fewer overall SARs, they had about 4,000 or 4,500 of these cyber events. I just think that you can't go again a day without seeing the news of the latest hack, and it might not always be an exchange, but the customers who are getting their phones hacked or having their their passwords stolen for their account and having their funds siphoned out that way. I mean, that has to happen on a daily basis. I just don't understand the disjoint between the risks and the number of filings. So I think, again, that would be something they could look at more closely, or perhaps it's being filed in some other category and not necessarily in the cyber event. And that could also be due to the newness of these programs. I mean, these firms that came out of nowhere all of a sudden, and now they have this huge responsibility and the manpower and effort. SARs are, they are labor intensive. So I just think that's something, again, an area that they could look at it more closely and say, is this commensurate with the risk and what our customers are actually, emailing customer service about, that they got locked out of their account or their funds were taken.
Right.
I think
there's two interesting points on that. One, you'll see a lot of the hacks are with DeFi protocols, so decentralized financing protocols, where centralized exchanges aren't really involved in the process. So there's really no need for them to file a SAR because people are individually maybe using their private wallets to fund these accounts, or using other like decentralized exchanges like Uniswap or others to fund these projects. Secondly, it's almost borderline when it comes to, as you say, a customer maybe was SIM swapped or someone took over their account, because although it's suspicious activity, it does borderline on fraud, and not 100% of crypto exchanges or even traditional financial institutions file on fraud. So that's another interesting aspect. They may not file SARs on fraud, although there's definitely both sides of the coin on how you approach fraud. So I think that's where,
like, from industry to industry, does one industry understand a scenario different from another industry? So that's an interesting way to look at it too. So a lot of the brokerage firms these days are online only, so they have the same, you're not walking into a branch anymore. You're only opening things online. You're doing all your transactions online, and they have more filings. It's a big chunk. They're good targets because it's a lot of money in one place. So I would have expected to see similar filing amounts, but there's only so many insights I can take. Sometimes I just have to point out, well, these things are different. Hand it off to law enforcement or the industry to figure out why.
Right. And speaking of leave it to industry to figure out why, all of this is such great research. You definitely pour in hours to it. But there's other industry professionals that say, like, we have to take everything you do with a grain of salt because there's no way to verify exactly. Obviously, your research is pointing out that even if the numbers aren't 100% exact, you're not far off. What are some of the disclaimers you put out? You talked a little bit about the caveats. What do you say to people who are just like, well, we can't confirm it, so we may not take any of this information to heart, versus like, well, you're probably not far off and they should start considering some of the points that you bring up?
Sure. I think the one of the helpful things is that comparing industry to industry. So if you're a new entity, whether you're a crypto or you're fintech, there are folks like banks and broker dealers who've been doing this a long time, and they know the attack vectors that bad actors are going to use. You might have at your crypto platform, a new financial product, but bad guys are still bad guys. They're going to go after the weak password. They're going to go after the elder abuse who doesn't understand. They're going to go after a lot of the similar vectors. Granted, there's new areas, and I think that's the communication within the industry. And I think it's a good, whether you have full confidence in my report or not, I think it's a good starting point to talk with your colleagues and say, okay, well, we saw this. Are your SARs more detailed, or are we off base, or we don't really get hacked? What are you doing that's better than our system that we get hacked all the time? So I think it's a good conversation starter for both folks in the industry, and then also, again, to remind those in the government that more information is needed, both to better regulate, better ability for the law enforcement to pursue the cases. And also, if they're looking forward to how to create new legislation, you need to have good data to do that. So if my data is limited with all the caveats I said, the only way to get better data is to improve that SAR form and have some new categories and ask more detailed questions because they're working with the same data that I have.
What are 2 to 3 things, as we end off this conversation, what are 2 to 3 things FinCEN can do right away to kind of implement some of your thoughts? And what are some of the things that exchanges need to do going forward based on your findings?
Sure. I don't know how slow the wheel of FinCEN moves. And they're a federal government agency, but just the 2 things I think would be helpful is first to align the SAR form with the national priorities I just released, a couple months ago. And one of the national priorities is the cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency exchanges. So how do you say it's a priority, but not have a way to simply file a SAR that aligns with that priority? And other priorities like drug trafficking and weapons proliferation. It's this kind of strange that you have priorities, but you can't explicitly say that on the SAR form. You can put it in narrative, but I have a whole topic on how narrative keyword searching is horrible and it misses a lot of things, and you have to guess what the person, how they spelled something. So better data will, create a better environment overall for regulatory purposes, law enforcement purposes. And then I think would also be helpful to the industry when they can more clearly understand what your industry is doing. That both the exchanges are just in the dark as I am, or the regulators, because there is no easy way to do it now. So for takeaways for the industry, take a look at this report, see how your firm matches up. And again, I can only look at San Francisco, though there's plenty of exchanges that are not located in San Francisco. Are you reporting things that were not reported in these other in this county? Are you missing things that they saw? Maybe take a look back. So I think it's a good conversation and a good place to start to see how things can be improved both within the industry and by regulator and government.
Awesome. And where can people find you, learn more about your skills as an expert witness? Where can they hire you, book you? And just read those reports, because every time you post these reports, people look forward. As soon as FinCEN announces their report, I just see your name pop up all over LinkedIn. Like, they're waiting for you to do the analysis. I don't feel like there's anyone else that does it as well as you and simplifies it as well as you. Not to knock anyone else that is doing it, but you're kind of the main person. People are like, okay, I'll just kick back and wait until Alison reviews it. I'm not going to take a stab at this. Let me just wait for Allison's report, and then I'll chop it up for my manager to sound great.
Oh, thank you for that. So I'm very active on LinkedIn, Alison Jimenez. My company's website is securitiesanalytics.com. It's a bit of a spelling bee. I apologize for that, but there's not too many Alison Jimenez's out there, and full name is Dynamic Securities Analytics, which I think you'll be able to link to in this post.
Yeah.
And I have my blog page, which has, I blog about all things AML, not just crypto, but Ponzi schemes and real estate, and the data is just a lot of fun to dig around in, and hopefully you guys will come away with something that you didn't know before.
That's awesome. I can't wait for everyone's probably says to you, can't wait for the next report, because once you break it down so easily, hopefully FinCEN sometime maybe this decade decides to update the reports. We saw how slow it is in Canada with their STR reports. It's not, as you say, it's not an easy wheel to kind of get moving. But I think FinCEN does a really great job of providing constant guidance. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. It was interesting because I actually first started doing my annual wrap up after they used to do an annual report themselves, but 2015, I believe, was last year. And I look forward to reading that, and they stopped doing that for whatever reason. So I kind of jumped in and took the job over for them, because it's important. It's important to know what's going on. And what FinCEN has been really good lately, they've been having these one-off advisories on different topics, and it's very helpful. But when I tried to do I just want to know how many SARs were filed by, about cryptocurrency, or how many SARs were filed by cryptocurrency exchanges. That was impossible to find. I had to read through, one of my blogs is, all the legwork I went through to find that data. And it was, in one speech over here and in a presentation over there, and, this advisory. And then it's not in a one spot for people to look at to gain insight from. But I do appreciate when they do have that in-depth, one topic advisory that, I read that, and everyone else should too, because it's well researched when they do produce it. It's just not as regular or ongoing as I think a lot of professionals could use in their day-to-day.
Awesome. It's going to be fun to have a recording like this next year and kind of see where we came from, what has changed, how the uptick, because I feel that there's going to be more of an uptick this year. We're already starting off with some pretty huge hacks. So it's going to be fun to kind of compare notes 365 days from now and jump back on the call with you. Thank you so much, Alison. And we look forward to your next report.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Take care.